Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. And we'll get right back where we left off yesterday in the book entitled The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. We're talking about the revolution in France, and France wants to be free. Roman Catholic France wants to have a representative form of government. They want to separate church and state. Roman Catholic France is sick and tired of being slaves to the papacy. They're sick and tired of papal tyranny and monarchical tyranny. They're sick and tired of the union of church and state. They're sick and tired of the church dictating civil policy. And they want to have an experiment, much like we had here in the United States. They want to follow our example. And one of the major strides in that direction was to place those of that mindset, those who are in a state of rebellion against the papacy and the monarchical power, as represented by the Holy Alliance and the Jesuits, have been elected to this Chamber of Deputies, a powerful portion of the government representing the people. Now, this startles the monarch, those who support papal monarchy in France. It says, in July of 1830, an overwhelming majority of liberal members were elected to the chamber, which alarmed the monarchical and royal power and increased the activity of the Jesuits. Now remember, the term liberal is the word that the Vatican uses to describe those who wish to strip the Pope of his temporal power and overthrow the papal king ruling France and want to install their own form of government, a constitution that responds to the people and guarantees certain inalienable rights to the people that the papacy cannot tread upon, nor the monarch. These liberal members were elected to the chamber, which alarmed the monarchical and royal power and increased the activity of the Jesuits. To counteract the influence of this election, an effort was made to turn the popular attention away from it by exciting the national pride in favor of royalty in consequence of the successful termination of the war in Algiers. So they knew how to mold the minds and distract the minds of the French people away from this great stride toward liberty in the election of these liberal members to the chamber by focusing the public attention upon the successful outcome of the war with Algiers, which was attributable to the monarch, the papal monarch of France. In other words, they incited national patriotism as a means to put in the distant background this wonderful accomplishment toward liberalism by these liberal members being elected to the chamber. This is a diversion. This happens all the time, as I said yesterday on the program, in the United States of America, and the press is the functionary in this. They are the ones who help distract the minds of the American people away from what is necessary for our understanding and places it on distractions. And I use the example of the colorful example of whose name even escapes me right now at the moment, one of the female rock stars that everybody's so goo-goo about in this country, who was photographed exiting an automobile in a tight, short skirt with no undies on. Okay? This is how the press distracts the American people from what really matters and puts it on things that don't matter, okay? Now, this is an example of France doing the same thing. rather than allow the people to have any time to reflect upon the fact that they had placed liberals on this council chamber, on this chamber of electors that would have bolstered the public fervor in favor of revolution, they distracted them away from that and toward celebration of the royalty for the consequence of successfully terminating the war in Algiers. Very, very tactful, very clever means of manipulating the minds of the French people who were set to rebel. Got them involved in patriotic activities. Okay? Now it says the royalists made this the cause of great rejoicing. And when they supposed that the people, impelled by their ideas of national glory, patriotism, had become sufficiently enthusiastic, resolved upon a step designed to crush out the popular spirit of liberalism. So, do you see I'll give you a very recent example of all this in America. When there was talk of revolution in this country, what happened? 9/11. And all of a sudden, the revolution, the focus was taken away from revolution in this country and placed on patriotism. 9/11 distracted the American people from trying to discover who or what is in control of our government. It was distracting the public mind away from those who loud voices in the alternative media who are trying to discover who is really in control of Washington, D.C., who establishes foreign policy, who has brought down our economy, who has shipped out all the jobs from this country into third world nations, Roman Catholic nations. 9/11 happened and changed all that. Now every American who was revolting against the government or finding fault and criticism of the government and researching who was in control of the government and where all these negative things were coming from, all of a sudden became red, white, and blue patriots coming to the rally of their country, which had been attacked. It was a diversion. It was a necessary diversion. The public mind was getting too close for comfort for the government and those who run the government and establish the policy, both domestic and foreign, for this country. Too much scrutiny on the government. So they did 9/11 to distract the people. Now, I'm going to say something that's going to shock many listeners. I believe our own government did 9/11. I don't just believe it, I know it. Okay? It was an intentional effort to distract the American mind away from what was really going on in Washington, to focus it overseas, and not only that, but to focus it on another one of the Pope's most grievous enemies, the Shia sect of Islam. Now, everybody knows, anybody who's done any research in this knows that Saddam Hussein had absolutely nothing, zero, to do with 9/11, and our own government admits it. But in spite of that, the fervor of patriotism even excuses that. We don't stop to consider that this nation was motivated to go to Iraq and kill a bunch of people that had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. Admittedly. What a horror. Now, I'm not defending Saddam Hussein or his regime or his religion or his country. I'm just telling you they didn't have anything at all to do with 9/11. This country should be in a state of repentance for what we did in Iraq. The false pretenses that were put upon us that justified this war against a nation that had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. But we're so patriotic, we can't admit making a mistake, and we can't scrutinize our government, even though we were scrutinizing it before 9/11. It's incredible how they engineer the thoughts and the motives and the emotions of the American people with these sorts of distractions. They used terror not only to incite a proxy war against the heretic Muslims. Again, the United States donning the Roman armor and running off in the name of the red, white, and blue to bomb into smithereens an innocent nation had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. Where's the repentance in this country? Where are the preachers in our country that are praying God's forgiveness for this and then questioning the government? Who did 9/11? If Saddam Hussein didn't do it, who did it? And investigating the evidence on their own to come up with the only conclusion that makes sense, that our own government did it. I'm telling my listeners that the George W. Bush administration, both men and women, are world-class criminals. For me to think that the most heavily defended airspace in this hemisphere, on the east coast of the United States, was permeable to a ragtag bunch of so-called Arabs who it is proven couldn't even fly Cessna 172s, commandeered multi-engine, heavy, wide-bodied, transcontinental-style airplanes from the most secure airports in this country, flew them around for hours in the most heavily defended airspace in this continent, and then struck buildings downtown Washington and New York City is untenable. It did not happen. Not unless our government allowed it to happen. I happen to be a pilot, and I know that when an airplane deviates from its flight plan, which all commercial airlines have to file flight plans with the Federal Aviation Administration, any airplane that deviates from that flight plan is immediately notified. If it doesn't respond to the notification on the radio, it isn't long before jets are scrambled. Now, somehow our air defenses were impudent that morning, and that just can't happen unless it is made to happen. And that's exactly what happened. Our government, in command of the air defenses of this country, gave them the stand down. And those airplanes were allowed to do what they did with government assistance. And you just simply have to know that the whole operation was a governmental hit. Look, we have examples, many, many, many examples in history. The one that most people are familiar with is the fact that the Roman government burnt Rome and then blamed it on the Christians. Okay? We have Pearl Harbor. And many people now know the truth about Pearl Harbor. Our own government supported the bombing of Pearl Harbor to incite this country to war against the promises of the elected president who said we weren't going to get involved in any wars. They did Pearl Harbor to get this country to go to war in the Second World War. And they did the same thing on 9/11. I mean, they've done it so many times throughout history, they've worn it out. You'd think by now the American people would be wise to it. But they're too patriotic to suspect their government of such a deviant behavior. They control our minds, and they use terror to do it. And not only did we go to war against an innocent nation, we were forced to surrender our Protestant liberties. The Patriot Act was published, passed by our Congress without even reading it, stripped the American people of the protections of constitutional government because of 9/11. An inside job, a government-sponsored attack upon its own people. The Jesuits and the monarchies, the kings of the earth, who are ruled over by the papacy, will stop at nothing to enslave the people and put them back under monarchical control. This government that set the example for all of Europe to rebel against the monarchy, to rebel against the papacy, is now being forced back into the monarchical form of government. And the American people are clueless, and all the answers lie in history. And that's why I'm reading these history books on the program. It says the royalists, those in support of the papal monarchies, made this the cause of great rejoicing, and when they supposed that the people, impelled by their ideas of national glory, had become sufficiently enthusiastic, resolved upon a step designed to crush out the popular spirit of liberalism. They used the celebration of the victory over the consummation of the war at Algiers to incite patriotic fervor, and then to take that excitement and use it to completely crush out liberalism in France. That's what they did here with the Patriot Act. They crushed out liberalism by passing the Patriot Act, stripping us of our constitutionally protected rights. They know how to play this game. They go to school to learn how to play this game. The Bible was absolutely correct when it spoke about Vatican City. Did you know the Bible speaks of Vatican City, where the Pope lives and rules? Yes, it calls it that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. They follow his bidding, not ours. Oh, they pay us lip service and convince some of us that they absolutely rule at our behest. I mean, after all, we go to the polls, don't we? We elect them, don't we? Well, we elect whoever they pick to run, whoever the Pope picks to run, but they don't. The Pope picks them. The candidates are picked by the Council on Foreign Relations. We get to vote, yeah, but we get to vote for one or two of the papal picks. There's no need to go to an election, a federal election in this country anymore. We don't get to pick the candidates. We don't get to pick a representative of the people. They always flood the field with people who are loyal to the Pope and to monarchism and to the overthrow of constitutional government. It's time for rebellion, and it's time to check the spirit of patriotism that they try to impose upon us to support this rebellious government. France should have been wiser, and certainly the United States should be wiser. He says the king's minister Polignac, the Archbishop of Paris, and the Jesuits succeeded in inducing the king to defy public opinion by issuing a royal edict to prevent the assembling of the liberal Chamber of Deputies. This edict was composed of 3 ordinances. Number 1, suspension of the liberty of press. What was the first thing to go? Liberty of the press. And of course you have to know that when liberty of the press went down, liberty of speech fell right along with it, because the press is speech. Okay, these are forbidden in Roman canon law. Roman Catholic canon law forbids freedom of speech, freedom of the press. It says the edict was composed of 3 ordinances. First, the suspension of the liberty of the press. The government took control of the press. No information was to be disseminated in France unless it was carefully scrutinized by the government. Number 2, dissolution of the Chamber of Deputies before it even met. They were never going to allow these liberals to have any say in the government. They just simply suspended them. And number 3, changing the plan of elections. Changing the plan of elections by placing the returns, that is, the election returns, in the hands of the prefects in the pay of the government. So they overthrew the electoral process in France. The government ran the elections, and they obviously got the outcome that the government wanted, the monarchy wanted, the papal monarchy wanted. Kind of like the United States. And it says, by this high-handed and arbitrary act, all of Paris was thrown into commotion. Within the course of 3 days, the spirit of revolution, which had been slumbering but was not suppressed, became thoroughly aroused. The public indignation was exhibited among all classes of the population, except those enlisted in the cause of retrogression, except those who were in favor of papal monarchic form of government. Retrogression. You see, liberal, Protestant forms of government, representative government, Republican forms of government, popular governments, was seen as progress. Well, the Pope doesn't want Protestant progress in the world. He wants retrogression, wants to go back to papal monarchical rule. So did the Jesuits. So did all the monarchs of Europe who had joined the Holy Alliance with the papacy and the Jesuits to overthrow all forms of popular government and throw all of Europe back into the papal monarchical tyranny that had ruled Europe for 1,500 years. The people demanded the rights which had been secured to them by public charter. The deputies of the chamber assembled. Barricades were thrown up in the streets. The popular revolt soon ripened into active revolution, which terrified the king, who, unable to pacify the people, attempted at last resort to do so by offering to rescind the tyrannical and obnoxious ordinances. See, when the people revolted, and they convinced the monarchy that they were serious, the monarch folded like a cheap suit. When the people are united against tyranny, tyranny folds like a cheap suit. But this tyrant was too late. The offense against the popular rights was too flagrant to be so easily forgiven. The result was that Charles X, the last of the Bourbon kings, was ignominiously driven from the throne and from the country. And Louis Philippe, the Duke of Orleans, made King of France. And thus did a Roman Catholic population fix the stamp of their reprobation upon the policy which the king, the papacy, and the Jesuits had designed for their enslavement. Would to God that the Protestants of America had as much understanding as these Roman Catholics in France.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
In this day of economic uncertainty and soaring unemployment, safe investments are often hard to find, but investing in the precious metals is the safest investment of all because gold and silver is real money. Government-printed currency is not. Call Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company at 1-800-375-4188. Melody has been helping people secure their financial future for over 10 years. While others in the business claim honesty, Melody will deliver. Give her a call, 1-800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. Remember, Inquisition Update is listener supported. And First Amendment Radio sponsors this program. Nicholas pays all the bills for Inquisition Update, acknowledging the value of the information presented here. So help preserve and to continue Inquisition Update by supporting First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And for my part, just please pray that God continue to inspire, to preserve and protect and provide for my wife and I as we continue in this ministry. Now, we're going to return to the book. Oh, by the way, if you'd like to make comment or questions or offer some support, prayerful support, contact me at tom@seawaves.us. tom@seawaves.us. I remind my listeners, this is a thankless job. A thankless job. And it's nice to hear a friendly word occasionally. Now, continuing with the book, it says it was impossible any longer to disguise or to mistake the true character of the issue between progress, and you may equate this progress with Protestantism, and retrogression, and you may relate that word to papal tyranny. Okay, so this is a contest between Protestantism, Christianity, and Antichrist. Christ on one side, Antichrist on the other. Protestantism on one side, Roman Catholicism on the other. Liberty on one side, papal tyranny on the other. Constitutional forms of government versus monarchies, papal monarchies. You ever stop and think about that image that is presented in the Bible? The head of gold, the shoulder of silver, the thighs of bronze, the 2 legs of iron, and then the feet and toes of iron mixed with miry clay. You know, the only component in that is not some form of metal is the clay, right? Did you know God made man out of clay? That's right. Even the man whom God created, who was blind in the streets of Jerusalem, Jesus made some spittle. You know what spittle is? Well, you reach down and you grab a little dust from the ground, you put it in the palm of your hand, and you spit in it and stir it up with your finger. What does that make? Clay, right? And he used that clay, the same substance out of which the man was made, the man that was made by the one who made the spittle, put the spittle on his eyes and told him to go wash. And when he came back, he could see. You see, Jesus heals the clay, but the iron boot of Rome tramples the clay. That's why at the bottom of the image, during the Iron Age of Rome, the iron is mixed with clay. And this was an attempt of the iron of the papacy to stamp the clay of France. And the clay rebelled and won, at least for a time. Same thing happened here in the United States of America. We were sick and tired of papal tyranny and persecution and inquisitions and tortures. We were sick and tired of the idolatry of the Roman Catholic Church, sick and tired of papal oppression, and we came to this country. We, clay, came to this country. Well, Rome has made a career of trampling the clay. And that's what she's going to do here in this country, just like she did in France, Germany, England, Spain, Portugal, Austria, the Netherlands, everywhere. There's no nation on the planet that is exempt from the iron heel of Rome, especially not when all the kings of the earth bow down and kiss his ring. They know that together they can rule and reign the world. But if we separate the monarchs from the Pope, if we separate church and state, they don't stand a chance. That's what France tried to do, separate church and state. And eventually they were crushed out, just like we're going to be crushed out here. Because if we forget the history, if we fail to comprehend the link between Bible prophecy and facts on the ground history, then that history is going to repeat itself. And it's repeating itself right here in the United States. The iron boot of Rome is coming to get the clay here in the United States. It was impossible any longer to disguise or to mistake the true character of the issue between progress and retrogression, between constitutionalism and monarchism. It did not, therefore, take long for these events in France to impart their influence to Roman Catholic populations elsewhere. You see, the people want to be free. And when France decided to be free, even to the extent of throwing their King Charles X out of the country, it incited revolution elsewhere in Roman Catholic countries. See, Catholics don't like to live under papal tyranny. History is full of example after example after example of Roman Catholics who do not like to be ruled over in civil affairs by the Roman Catholic Church, by the priests and the popes. And certainly you would think the Protestants, those who got their name from rebelling against the papacy and protesting the papacy, you'd think that they would be leading the charge against this papal tyranny that has raised its diabolical head here in the United States. But no, they're uniting with the Roman Catholic Church. It's just incredible. But it's not funny. It's diabolical. It's what it is. He says, throughout the central parts of Europe, the people were stirred up to inquiry, to protest, and to revolution. Having by this time fully realized that the chief calamities which affected them proceeded from the union of church and state. All their problems originated from the union of church and state, and they were becoming aware of it all over Europe. and that a constitutional guarantee of protection was impossible so long as that union of church and state continued, their first efforts were directed to the separation of these powers and the assignment to each its proper and independent sphere of duties. Many centuries of struggles had demonstrated that in no other way could political equality be obtained or provision be made for assuring to them their natural and inalienable rights. The task was most difficult because the papacy had been permitted to enlarge its powers by means of false decretals. We've already studied them, the pseudo-Isidorian decretals. We did that in R.W. Thompson's first book, The Papacy and the Civil Power. This is where the papacy produced a body of work now known as Roman Catholic canon law of the decrees of the popes. And in each decree, more and more and more power was arrogated to the papacy. More and more temporal power, kingly power. Okay? This is the reference R.W. Thompson's making right here. It says the task was most difficult because the papacy had been permitted to enlarge its powers by means of the false decretals and the constitutions, which the ambitious popes throughout history had employed without scruple after they sundered their allegiance to the Eastern Empire and divided the church. Remember, the Roman Catholic Church rebelled against Constantinople, and East and West became separate. And to assert its ascendancy over the East, Rome came up with these pseudo-Isidorian decretals, Roman Catholic canon law, which declared that the Pope was not now just the Lord of the Roman Catholic Church and the replacement of the Son of God on earth. He was Caesar. He wasn't just the great high priest of the Roman Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire. He was the Caesar, the temporal power. It says, nevertheless, they resolved upon the effort, hazardous as it was, rather than remain longer in their humiliating condition of vassals while the Protestant nations were moving forward in their careers of progress and improvement. You see, they were all looking at the Protestants, particularly here in the United States, who had liberated themselves. Look, here's a problem. These Roman Catholic nations see the Protestant nations and the progress that had come out of Protestantism. They wish to have the same benefits that the Protestants did. But you know what the problem is? While they wanted to overthrow the temporal power of the Pope, they still wanted to recognize the Pope as the spiritual head of the church. You see, they wanted to be Protestant, but not really. I mean, the benefits of Protestantism came from rejecting the papacy as Antichrist. Both his spiritual and temporal power are not ordained of God. He is not the vicar of Christ. He has no spiritual knowledge or understanding. He is a rebel against the throne of Almighty God, and we want nothing to do with it. And especially we don't want him in our church. Lock, stock, and barrel. They relegated the papacy to the pit of perdition, where he belongs. And that's why they were successful. They rejected Antichrist, and they went headlong into the arms of Jesus Christ. No equivocation, no mental reservation. They were free. But these Roman Catholic countries, envious of the status, the affluence, the wealth, the freedom of the Protestant nations, made a halfway measure. Halfway at best. They wanted to destroy the Pope's temporal power. No longer shall he be a king over us. But they kept him as the priest, the high priest of the Roman Catholic Church. And they all loved the Roman Catholic Church, the cult of Rome, the woman that rides the scarlet-colored beast of Revelation 17. They loved that woman. They loved that whore. And God wouldn't honor a halfway measure. So that's why they continually had to fight the papacy, because if they acknowledge his spiritual power, they must acknowledge his temporal power. That's Roman Catholic canon law. That strikes at the very heart of the power of the Roman Catholic Church. You cannot separate the temporal power from the spiritual, says the Pope. Now, this is even represented by the papal flag. If you've never seen the papal flag, I suggest you go on a search engine and type in papal flag and get a good look at it. First of all, it's yellow and white, but what's most important is that the imagery in that flag is representative of a skull and crossbones. Dead ringer for what it really is. We have the papal tiara with its 3 crowns, the one authorizing the Pope rulership over heaven, over the earth, and over hell. And then beneath, and crossed beneath that papal tiara, representing the skull in the skull and crossbones, are the crossbones. And they are represented as 2 keys, a golden key and a silver key. And the golden key, normally, if it's displayed properly, the golden key overlays the silver key. And not only that, but they are bound with a scarlet-colored cord. Now, the silver key represents the Pope's temporal power, temporal power, and the golden key represents his spiritual power. His spiritual power overpowers his temporal, or empowers his temporal power. And these 2 powers, the spiritual and the temporal, are bound with a scarlet-colored cord. So any attempt of anybody to separate the silver key from the golden key must undo the scarlet-colored cord. In other words, bloodshed. The papacy will resort to bloodshed anytime somebody attempts to remove the Pope's silver key. And history is replete with example after example after example. We're reading them right now of what happens when someone tries to extricate from the covetous grip of the papacy his self-arrogated authority to govern the whole world in temporals, to rule over the kings of the earth. Because the kings of the earth, that temporal power that he shares with the kings of the earth, are the key to his survival. Because his spiritual power is a fiction. He has no spiritual power at all in the world. No legitimate spiritual power whatsoever. The only spiritual power that the papacy has in the world is whatever power the people lend to him. If when they see the Pope, they cross themselves, they genuflect, they lift their hands to heaven, praising God for this so-called Holy Father, then he has power. But as during the Protestant Reformation, when they regarded the Pope as Antichrist and walked away from him like so much dirt in the street, he had no power. And they led a revolution against the papacy all over Europe. Even Roman Catholics followed that example, although they didn't follow it all the way. They still wanted to maintain the spiritual power of the Pope. They wanted to let him keep his golden key, but they wanted to take away his silver key. Can't do it. You can't do it. Not unless you're ready to defend yourself with the most powerful military force to meet the military force that the papacy lays up against you. And here's another example. He says it was impossible any longer to disguise or to mistake the true character of the issue between progress and retrogression, between constitutionalism and monarchism. It did not therefore take long for these events in France to impart their influence to Roman Catholic populations elsewhere. Throughout the central parts of Europe, the people were stirred up to inquiry, to protest, and to revolution. Having by this time fully realized that the chief calamities which affected them proceeded from the union of church and state, and that a constitutional guarantee of protection was impossible so long as that union continued, Their first efforts were directed to a separation of these powers and the assignment of each its proper and independent sphere of duties. Many centuries of struggles had demonstrated that in no other way could political equality be obtained or provision be made for assuring to them their natural and unalienable rights. The task was most difficult because the papacy had been permitted to enlarge its powers by means of false decretals and constitutions, which the ambitious popes had employed without scruple after they sundered their allegiance to the Eastern Empire and divided the Church. Nevertheless, they resolved upon the effort, hazardous as it was, rather than remain longer under the humiliating condition of vassalage while the Protestant nations were moving forward in their careers of progress and improvement. A brief glance at the condition of Europe will show that they were favored by the times, as if Providence, capital P, were then specially shaping the destiny of the world so as to put a stop forever to the usurpations by which the union of church and state had been so long maintained, to the prejudice of the church and the cause of Christianity, no less than the natural rights of mankind. The Netherlands contained a population united only under a government maintained by the combinations which had arisen out of the Holy Alliance. In the north, Protestantism had the ascendancy. In the south, Roman Catholicism prevailed. This latter part of the population, the Roman Catholic part of the population, imitating their Christian brethren in France, desired separate independence, so that their civil institutions should be placed under their own control, not under the popes. They desired a constitution by which proper restraints could be placed upon the royal power, while at the same time they did not desire to destroy entirely the principle of monarchism, but rather that it should continue to exist under proper limitations, so as to escape from the absolutism which had hitherto borne so heavily upon them. Being unable to accomplish their object in any other way, they inaugurated an insurrection in Brussels, which soon became a revolution and resulted in a declaration of independence. The revolution soon acquired strength enough to establish the government of Belgium, which then became separate from Holland. A king was chosen by elected Congress, but the Constitution tied his hands, and instead of being an absolute, he became a dependent monarch. In this, there was no attempt to escape from the just and rightful influence of the Roman Catholic Church. Remember, these are Roman Catholics. They don't want to abandon the Church. They just want to abandon the Pope's temporal power. It says, in this, there was no attempt to escape from the just and rightful, according to Catholics, influence of the Roman Catholic Church, for which the population retained the attachment that they had long felt. But it severed the bond of the union between church and state by placing in the hands of the people such portion of the powers of government as they deemed it proper to assert, so that instead of submitting to the absolute dominion of the papacy, they protected their own rights and interests by constitutional guarantees. Okay, the Pope sees this as rebellion. There's no doubt about it. And it is rebellion, according to the papacy. And these Roman Catholics know it's rebellion. They're not going to put up with papal tyranny anymore. He can be the head of the church, but he's not going to be the head of our government. It says it practically condemned the doctrines of the Jesuits, which denounced revolution against absolute monarchism as a sin, and laws proceeding from a tribunal of the people as heresy, and rightfully subject to resistance. France and Belgium, having therefore both accepted revolution as a remedy for grievances which could no longer be endured, it excited no surprise when the same sentiment was imparted to other Roman Catholic populations of Europe. The masses were moved almost everywhere by the impulse to escape the influences of the old regime and placed themselves under institutions of their own creation, responsible only to themselves. The people of the different nations were beginning to understand and to sympathize with each other more and more as ever before. They were coming nearer together by means of the facilities of intercommunication, for which they were indebted to the spirit of Protestant progress. Protestantism brought mass communication. Okay? They had freedom of speech, freedom of press, so they communicated by speech and the press. And of course, the Protestant press was read by the Roman Catholics. And they used the same communication technologies that existed at that time that the Protestants used to further their revolution against the papacy. And it says they were learning from the marvelous successes of the advancing nations that the real source of national greatness were in their own hands and depended for proper development upon themselves alone. In whatsoever direction they looked, they found evidences to assure them that these same successes could not be obtained without the constitutional guarantee of the right of self-government. And having been brought to the conviction, no matter whether from choice or from necessity, that they could more safely confide their temporal welfare to governments of their own construction than to either ecclesiastical, that is church, or secular monarchs, that state, who traced the prerogatives of absolute imperialism to the divine law, they accepted revolution as a just and rightful remedy for their wrongs. Revolution. They recognized, because of mass communication given to them as a result of the Protestant Reformation, they realized that revolution was their only hope of separating church and state. And don't you know, the blood flows when you try to remove the silver key from the Pope's golden key, his temporal power from the spiritual. History drips with bloodshed because of the attempt.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.